The Canadian language law is in effect as of June 20th, 2025. How does this affect you? Okay, Cal, how does this new legislation affect you?
Well, it doesn't affect me directly. However, one of the one of the issues is that with the world turned upside down the way it is, and the news dominated by all kinds of things, most of which have nothing to do with Canada and in particular language, I was shocked to find out that we have an action plan for official languages that is providing an additional $1.4 billion over 5 years to top up a $2.7 billion fund
Wow.
to bring in official language strategies. I didn't realize that we had language zones in Canada with respect to federal government employees where they have to have a certain rated system of being able to speak both uh, read, write, and speak French as well as English. That was news to me, and that came up when researching part of this G7 material.
Yeah, I wasn't
I,
aware of it until you pointed that out either. And doing a little further research on it, it's been sort of interesting to find out what's been transpiring and not really making the news.
yeah, it says the plan's objective is to lay the groundwork for substantive equality between English and French in Canada, which seems counterintuitive when one of the provinces has declared itself unilingual, and that just happens to be the province that we're trying to protect with this French language rights. I'm having difficulty trying to figure out where are they going to spend almost $5 billion to promote alleged bilingualism in Canada when one of the provinces refuses to acknowledge it's bilingual at all.
Well, is it possible that this legislation was a trick legislation that would allow English language to penetrate the not bilingualism in Quebec so that English speakers like me could actually get the supervisor roles by just learning a little bit of French? I
Well,
don't see that as a possibility, but I mean, when you look at New Brunswick, which is truly a bilingual province, why isn't Quebec bilingual?
when I dug into this deeper, there's apparently 35,000 supervisors, and the new provisions applies to supervisors. As a supervisor, you need to be fluent in both French and English. And the 35,000 supervisors are in bilingual regions, 87% of which have bilingual roles, which works out to about 30,500 individuals who are going to be directly affected by this. So
Wow.
the problem that I have is they're slipping in billions of dollars in funding to target apparently 30,000 government workers in supervisory positions. What they say is 57% of the supervisors in bilingual areas whose first language is English did not meet, and they have this level CBC, and what that is essentially speaking, writing, and reading. If your first language was French, it was 29%. So this affects fewer French speakers than English speakers. So what I did next was try to figure out where are these alleged bilingual regions, and of course they actually have a list of bilingual regions in Canada for language of work purposes, an entire list of the province of New Brunswick is the entire province, and that's because
Correct.
they declared themselves bilingual.
Yes,
But they
that
have
makes sense.
bilingual regions of Montreal, bilingual regions of other parts of Quebec, bilingual regions of Eastern Ontario, bilingual regions of Northern Ontario, and of course the National Capital Region. So there's specific regions in Canada now that have been set aside basically for this funding. I presume the
So
billions of dollars.
are these regions identified in Quebec? Are they officially bilingual regions then that contradict the legislation in Quebec saying they're unilinguistical? Like,
No,
is that what
no.
is that the implications of it, that there are bilingual areas that are predominantly English speaking or in Quebec?
I presume there must be a base in census information. However, what this does is it means that if you want to work for the federal government or a federal government corporation,
Yeah.
you need to be able to be bilingual to a certain degree in order to be a supervisor.
So you're telling me that with experience in managing and setting up businesses, if I apply for a job and I've got more experience and knowledge and skills bringing to the table, I'm precluded from the job because my French is 3 years of high school, and out here in Alberta, we don't use French very often. So my French is deteriorated to the point that I'm not fluent in it, or the capacity to speak it in a meaningful manner. But with today's technology, I have apps on my phone. I've talked to people from Ukraine, I've talked to people from Iran, I've talked to people on the street who has no basic communication in English, and we do it through apps, and the interpretations are very accurate, and any document I get in French can be quite easily translated into English without any interpretation flaws that a person may or may not be interpreting correctly as well, because there might be bias in the way they speak the language. Now, since you were talking with me, I looked up a few stats on the fact that many languages around the world are disappearing, and English is one of the languages that are expected to be the dominant languages in the world. And it has to do with it absorbs words and definitions from all languages and is expanding. Where French, I think, is the official language in 29 countries around the world, and Spanish is 30-some countries in the world, and Spanish has 600 million speakers and French has 300 million speakers. I guess what I'm pointing at is there's enough Spanish-speaking people in Canada. Why isn't it classed as an official language too? I'm just being facetious, but in today's technology, I don't feel that language is a culture. I've never thought it language was a culture. Quebec is part of Canada. I have no distinguishing characteristics walking downtown Ottawa to walking downtown Quebec City. They have the same services, same businesses, same offerings. They celebrate the same holidays. The only difference is Quebec is saying, well, we speak French, we're a different culture. Language is not a culture, my friend. I defy anybody to tell me the language is a culture. And in Canada, I respect that we're bilingual. I think it's great to know more than one language. My kids are trilingual, so that they were sent to bilingual school by choice. I felt it was a good avenue for them to be intellectually capable of talking with other people from other backgrounds. But it is not a culture by any means that you speak a language. It is a courtesy to allow interaction with people that feel more comfortable talking in their native tongue. Canada, like out here in Alberta, does this new law mean that flair or sexsmith should have the same rights? If you're going to impose it in areas of Quebec, you should be saying that these French communities all across Canada should have the same law applied to them. That doesn't seem to be happening. I guess I'm getting a little divergent, but in my Canada, there is no cultural difference because of a language. I mean, Tecumseh helped set up Canada. should we have Shawnee as an official language? He helped set up and maintain Canada. Sure, why not? I mean, language is only relative to the people that are speaking it. Now that we have AI, I can interpret any language in the world. And, the code breakers language is now going to be able to be interpreted by AI. So the technology in the world is making it that the world is a homogeneous mix. Every city around the world looks similar anymore because the money people are making them the same way around the world. And you can drop me into Hong Kong, I will survive because I have AI. And the cities and the services and the businesses are all the same that are downtown Calgary as downtown Toronto. I'm not seeing the cultural component anymore as technology has built a new world culture. That's my take on my rant. You got any opinions on that? Maybe some people will like to comment on that.
I'd like to know where the money's going. Like when I read what they're saying here, they're talking about initiatives to renew and expand 10 new communities over the past summer for a total of 25 new areas, right? Welcoming francophone communities. So they have something called a welcoming francophone communities initiative to support francophone immigration and implementation of the action plan for official languages. So they're saying now that they have to balance the number of French-speaking immigrants. So they're suggesting that they're going to create all these support initiatives to promote communication strategies aimed at French-speaking candidates, carry out research and case studies that identify systemic barriers to identifying, recruiting, and selecting French-speaking candidates. So we're
How
going to
many
take
billions is this costing Canadians out of pocket? I mean, I see an article here saying it's 1.5 billion over 5 years in new investments
well,
on
and
this language.
somebody needs to explain to me, okay, you're going to carry out research and create case studies that identify systemic barriers to identify, recruiting, and selecting French-speaking candidates. So what happens when you study and identify these barriers? And what, you need another $4 billion? Like
it looks
it's
like it. I mean, it's dubious in what the heck this expenditure is. I mean, as taxpayers, even in Quebec, you got to be looking at this, going shaking your head. I mean, it doesn't benefit Quebec really to be isolated from the rest of Canada, having the same culture as the rest of Canada. I do see it. Maybe you might be able to convince me that this was a greater strategy, knowing Trump was getting elected, and they wanted to strengthen the official language of French across Canada to deter Trump from wanting to invade, because he can't speak French and he doesn't like immigrants and he doesn't like other cultural languages. So he definitely wouldn't like French. That might be a deterrent for Trump, but the reality is it's still Canada. Quebec is Canada. The culture is Canada. There's no French culture in Quebec. They dance the same as I do. I wrote a book on Canadian culture dance, and dancing in Quebec is the same as dancing in Alberta, and we use it as a social endeavor where, at 60 below and 8 months of winter, we learned a lot about dancing. It was passed down by the generations, and that's a cultural component of Canada, and we failed to even recognize that cultural component, yet they're trying to claim that they're a culture of their own in Quebec. Get real, boys.
Well, I didn't realize they did the chicken dance in Quebec as well.
Well, I mean, they might be chickens in Quebec, but I don't know. But the chicken dance is just a choreographed line dance out of Alberta that really was specific to one song. But I mean, we have a lot of dances that, like the reels and the polkas and all these dance steps that are not American. They are not American. They're not part of American ballroom. They're not
Well,
part of Latin American dancing. They're not part of Texas shuffle stepping. They're very unique Canadian cultural based dances that were like my great grandfather was a dance performer and he passed it down. And I've been all across Canada. These same dance techniques are used all across Canada. They were just not formally taught. We learned as kids at community dances to use them. Now that's a cultural component that transcends the province of Quebec because the same dance steps used in Quebec were used out here in Alberta. And I went right across Canada dancing and checking and researching this data. So,
okay, so I have some advice for you. Perhaps you should
perfect.
relabel the whatever these dances are, like the polkas, with a French name,
Well, there
and
you go. Then it's
and
popular.
no, apply for some of this $5 billion that's going to be floating
Oh
around.
yeah, well I applied to universities and everything and grants for 40 years. I've had this and nobody going to back it because I'm an Albertan saying this is cultural to Canada. And, you know, my great grandparents came out of Ontario, and that's where there's nothing new in dance since the 1930s. The music has changed, but the dance has never changed. And they've tried to modernize it, get performances in dance, but the basics never changed. So it's a cultural component of Canada. And I laugh when people are so quick to throw culture as a identifier based on language when culture is built across the entirety of the country due to our weather and advancement in technology and has very little to do with language. I don't care what language you speak, I'll communicate with you. And now that technology is really good, I don't have a language barrier with anybody.
But
French is not a culture. Sorry.
again, we're talking billions. Where are the billions going? So
I don't know.
one of their programs are to explore new and promising practices for promotion to retention of immigrants. So maybe if you relabel your dancing
Hey,
to
great
French,
idea.
yeah, you could promote the retention of immigrants through your now
Well, it
relabeled
would only
French
work if it was
dance steps.
European immigrants because they passed down most of the thing inadvertently to Canada anyway by being a multicultural country.
Well,
But hey,
you're
I
in
should be
trouble.
entitled. I should be entitled to some of that. I'll even learn to speak French if you pay me enough money.
Well, you're going to be out of luck because they're going to increase the targeted promotional activities and expand them in regions such as sub-Sahara Africa and Latin America. Now,
Oh
I
wow.
don't I don't know how many French-speaking countries there are in Latin America. You know,
Well,
they're
I
not
think
saying.
it's all Spanish, isn't it?
Well, that's why they call it
Oh,
Latin.
maybe.
Why would you say Latin America when it's Francophone South America that you're talking about?
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
like the wait. Well, we got to sort those words out so I can see a couple 100 million perhaps going to that. And
Yeah,
then
they better get that terminology correct. I
yeah,
mean, it is a
uh,
government program.
and then they're going to ensure a francophone lens is more systematically integrated into our economic programs to support labor market shortages across Canada.
Does
Like,
that mean we get francophones at minimum wage? I'm just being a fool, but okay.
I could see a couple 100 million going there because don't forget it's 4 billion. Analyze temporary and permanent economic programs with the intention of optimizing the selection of francophone immigrants.
So are
Um,
we now inviting from these 29 French countries around the world? They obviously don't like living in their country. Are we inviting them now to Canada to say, well, you've destroyed the country you took over around the world and you're going to run to Canada because you have special rights here? I
uh,
don't know. Is that what that's
uh,
behind that legislation?
well, apparently the guy that's in charge of this program was saying that he gets a couple of hundred complaints, language complaints a year.
Mostly out of
So,
Ontario, though.
well,
Or is it?
but it's a couple of hundred complaints a year. So for a couple of hundred complaints a year, we're going to spend $4.5 billion.
Oh, yeah, that
Uh,
makes sense. I mean, realistically, yeah, it's a joke. I have no other way of defining it. I think it's very divisive when you start feeding into this aspect, say, you're not helping the Canadian image. Canada is a culture of Canada, and it includes the French. They are just as much part of Canada as my English and Scottish heritage, which is also something I would like to point out is that they even changed the national anthem, removing the word sons in All Our Sons Command, which was the only reference to the Scottish heritage of colonizing Canada and protecting Canada from the US. And in Scottish, sons means wealth. So in All Your Wealth Command was what that line in the song was. Now it's totally removed. And the Scottish had a lot of influence in Canada because it was the Scottish Masons that set up the Mason network across North America, which is the prelude to the Knights Templar, which ran and hid in Scotland when the French king was persecuting them. But that's a little history, but the French are more recognized than the Scottish in Canada, and yet the Scottish contributed as much as the French. But that's cultural assimilation, so that Canada is one culture.
So how many billions are we spending on enhancing the Scottish language in Canada?
There's no money going up my skirt. I got nothing to hide under there anyway. Good Scotsman never wears anything under his kilt. I learned that grade one. Grade one, I wore my kilt, and dang that the girls didn't lift it for their package surprise. It was free floating.
Back to this topic again. I'm reading this material directly from the government website. I don't understand what they're talking about. They're saying support the program to pilot the involvement of communities across the immigration continuum, in particular in promotion activities in Canada and abroad.
Well, what's that mean? That sounds like political jargon in its finest. Say nothing.
It's unbelievable. So they're going to spend the money on this character in charge of this program is going to spend the money on whatever he wants and somehow bring it within the geographic scope and influence of the quality of language training. And they're talking about both official language, but this money isn't going to enhance English anywhere.
Well, my understanding is there's a bilingual bonus still on the books where French speakers get $800 bonus for federal jobs over an English speaker. How is that fair? If it's still on the books, and according to my research, it is. The $800 bonus hasn't increased since 1977, but you get more money than me because you speak French? Like, that's not fair. That should be put a stop to. Equal job, equal pay. There's no reason for it in today's society. I mean, like I said, I can use an AI program and interpret any language document you want. So there's no bonus required. You got to know how to use a translation app. That's it. That's it. So there should be no bonus of $800 annually to a federal employee that is bilingual. That is absolute garbage, in my opinion. Get up with the times, government. Translations apps are a fact of reality, and they make it easy for anybody, including me, to talk to anybody around the world. And if an old fart like me can do it, anybody can do it. Even you can, Cal.
I didn't realize this, that Canada needs 10,000 teachers to address its French immersion shortfall.
10,000 teachers for French immersion? I mean, I enrolled my kids because I want them to be smarter people. Multiple languages makes them smarter. But I guess that would be a good program. That I could see as a viable program because teaching languages is, I think, a very important part of being a world aware person. So 10,000 new jobs teaching?
that stat came from 2021, and it was put out by a society, the Canadian Association for Immersion Professionals, and the
Oh,
Canadian
okay, so they
Association
want that.
for Second Language Teachers.
Yeah, okay, so they're promoting that they want more. Supply and demand curve probably warrants that it should be viable. But I would be happier if the government did that and made more immersion programs available and more teachers. And not only offered French, but also offered Spanish and any language that you so want, including Shawnee. I mean, they help make Canada Canada. So that should be a directive of the federal government, is making language courses available to everybody, not just French language.
Excuse me, my allergies were getting me.
Oh,
I guess part of the $4.5 billion will go to retaining French immersion teachers.
yeah. Well, I don't even know how to speak enough French to say much anymore. After never using it, it becomes redundant. I mean, if you drop me in a French community where nobody was going to speak English to me, yeah, 6 months later, I'm pretty fluent at it. I did have enough training. I'm sure the words and language would come back. But one of the most enlightening experiences I ever had was about 20 years ago. I'd never been to the Maritimes, and I went to New Brunswick. Man, was that a great eye opener. That is truly a great province within Canada. I went to French communities where the old guy at the corner store couldn't speak English, and we had a laugh and a great time talking, and we didn't have translation apps that we knew how to run anyway. But it was fun, and it was a great experience. I recommend it to anybody to go to New Brunswick and learn what true cultural diversity is about, based on multiple languages, and they have the right attitude of inclusion. You won't get that in Quebec. Even the New Brunswick people understand that the arrogance of the Quebec and only wanting to speak their language of French is not fitting in to a Canada image. I remember, I think it was St. Baptist celebrations, the New Brunswickers told me, I wanted to see this because we don't have it out here in Alberta. They told me, don't even bother going because the Quebec French will be there, and they really are belligerent. And I said, well, I'm going. And they told me, well, we'll go with you, but do not speak English at this French thing, or we may be in trouble there. And of course, I didn't speak anything at all, so no French could overhear me. But that was the magnitude of this so-called language culture. No, it's not a language is not a culture. I wanted to participate in this celebration because it's part of what made up Canada. And I'm told I have to be silenced because I don't speak that language. No, that's not right. And today that's still not right. I don't know what your take is. I don't. You have you been to New Brunswick?
Yes, more power to them. But I'm still amazed at $4.5 billion. Now, I'm reading an article here where it says that there are 48,000 certified teachers that don't want to teach.
Wow.
So,
Well, I mean, the new teaching rules, I could see why it might, they don't want to teach, but that dumbfounds me.
well, and maybe some of the $4 billion can go to raising the base pay for teachers, so
How
that
many French are there in Canada that class themselves as single language French?
I don't know. But again, in today's market, like you said, where everything is predominantly U.S. entertainment, and the entertainment is mostly in English, it's extremely difficult for any other language to hold itself in that environment, especially when we live that close to the U.S. Quebec has only survived with a majority French-speaking population because they are in Canada, and Canada is holding the umbrella for them. You got to spend money someplace, but four and a half
Well, it says,
billion
I
billion
did a
dollars.
quick search and it said there's 10 million French speakers in Canada, and that's 22% of the population of Canada as their first language. So for 22% of the population, we're spending that much money to enshrine their language is dominant in those roles for high-paying jobs. I find that, I don't even have a word for it. I mean,
Yeah,
and 84% of francophones live in Quebec. I mean, so we got 22% of the population, of which 84% live in Quebec, and they're getting billions of dollars to ensure that they get the top management jobs in those regions.
essentially.
That's not ethically fair to the rest of us.
Well, I think you have to look at what is fairness. Is it fair that the lower level employees can speak to their managers in any language or their language of their choice, or is it really has the system not worked before, or are we selecting a certain class of people to become managers and excluding others by this requirement for language?
Well, I think
And
we're excluding. I've seen another thing where an employee in a federal agency has a choice to operate or to work in their language of their choice. So if a francophone wants to work speaking French in a job role, how does that work? I walk up to that employee and I'm speaking English. They just refuse to serve me. Like,
I, here's another thing. The Treasury Board Secretariat says that if one of the supervisors who now has a job but doesn't meet the minimum requirements switches their job, then they have to qualify for the new standard. In other words, the current supervisors will be grandfathered in. The new ones, or if you
so the
change jobs,
upward mobility is off the table
that's
if you're
right.
not able to learn the language in a
That's
short
right.
order. So now you're ensuring that the higher management is people of your selection.
Now, does that open a constitutional challenge that you're getting discriminated against on the basis of
Well, they
linguistics?
obviously are discriminated against, but does the Charter of Rights give you legal challenge in the Supreme Court where they probably wouldn't even hear it? You know, like they select, it's not even a real justice system where they get to pick and choose what they're going to hear. And I don't think they'd want to hear that, because if they made a ruling on it, they would probably rule in favor of Quebec, you know, the language French. So
Well,
I don't
Quebec would
know.
just say the notwithstanding clause,
Oh yeah, exactly.
exempt themselves from whatever the court decided anyway. So
It's mute.
it
You'd never stand a chance of claiming that you prejudiced out of a job.
now does it also open up another bone of contention between Western Canada and Eastern Canada, in that this money will be primarily spent in Quebec and secondarily in Ontario, because that's where these special regions are. So Quebec, being a have-not province when it comes to transfer payments, means that they will be receiving these funds. The only
They won't count as the funds to qualify for transfer
transfer,
payment.
of course not. It'll just be another flow of money from Ottawa to Quebec that goes unaccounted for. But the other issue is, if you're a taxpayer in Alberta and you're looking at funding bilingualism, where the money is being taken from the Western provinces and dumped in Quebec, is that a good idea? Does that
Well,
help
I'm
this
sure Smith is going to be paying attention to our podcast, because we just opened her eyes that she can throw more gasoline on the fire from the information we've uncovered. So this is going to be something Smith is definitely going to promote and start waving her little flag or whatever at and throwing junk at Carney about how he's now Trudeau, and now we've inflamed the fire.
Well,
Thank you.
and
Thank you,
and his
Cal.
historically, one of the reasons for language was so that you could retain your workforce. For example, if you were in Europe and you spoke the language of the local princedom, you couldn't take your labor somewhere else because you couldn't speak the language. So you end up with all these little pockets of language all over the place to maintain your workforce. In Quebec,
Great way of doing it.
yeah, in Quebec, for example, the people, the young people in Quebec, if they don't speak English, are going to have a difficult time in going anywhere else in Canada and finding employment that requires English. So it's a way of maintaining control over your population. The elites in Quebec all speak English fluently.
Well, yeah. Now you hit the nail on the head there, buddy. That seems to be what all this is really about: is ensuring that the young people coming up in Quebec, and they have a lot of young people compared to the rest of Canada, I do believe. They subsidize families to have more kids, yeah, and daycare. So there is more families, young families there. And if you do use the culture, well, we were not even going to call it culture, if you use the language to prevent these people from having access to the rest of North America, it is a weaponization of the language, and that is something that the young people should be aware of. And I don't think the federal government should allow weaponization of language to further the agenda of keeping people stranded in Quebec. You made a very strong point that I was overlooking.
I think realistically, the people that think they're being helped by this type of process don't realize that they're actually being trapped by the process. And it's I'm sure the people who are thinking, well, we'll spend $4.5 billion, bringing in French immigrants to Canada is somehow going to help, bilingualism. They probably honestly believe that. But I think the language issue can be divisive, where people go, I didn't get that job because I didn't speak French. I didn't get that job because I didn't speak English. I'm being discriminated against because I'm French or because I'm English, or the French are getting all the money and the English are making all the payments. Like it becomes a divisive issue. So I think they have to be careful when they start to promote this type of program. And especially
that was the reason I made sure my kids were enrolled in French immersion, because they would be prejudiced from what I've seen, and now they're not. And their Spanish comes important too, because it's probably the language that is going to be dominant in America, period. Yeah, language can be a divisive factor when weaponized for just what you said. And I think you hit the nail on the head. And I'm glad I made sure my kids were enrolled in French immersion, and I think all parents should be doing that.
And again, if you read what the action plan says, they're going to launch a mobile application in collaboration with the CBC Radio Canada to help Canadians learn the second official language. I'm having difficulty envisioning any teenager plugging into his CBC Radio Canada app to learn French. It's just not gonna happen.
Yeah, that's more fuel for the conservative movement that wants to totally get rid of CBC.
Funding 137 new projects for the Quebec English Speaking Communities Fund. Well, that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
2,000 childcare spaces for supporting early childhood development program. This is what they're saying they're going to be blowing this money on, or have blown it on.
Wow.
Enhancing the Community Cultural Action Fund to benefit 752 minority language schools, 53 projects funded by the Bilingual Ottawa program. Like
I don't know.
I don't see anything in here from Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia,
Yeah,
let alone the maritime provinces.
I
And
don't
if
know
you,
what's going through their heads when they're doing programs like that and passing legislation like this. Their vision or of Canada seems to be really skewed, and I think it's lining the pockets of influencers or lobbyists, and that's all it is. And it's almost like blackmail payments. Just keep quiet. We'll shove money. No, we'll make sure the accountability isn't there. Nobody's going to be able to trace where the money's going, and billions of dollars seem to funnel out into programs that the money could be better spent across Canada, helping all Canadians. We are one culture. We're called Canada.
I just have trouble imagining how they're ever going to uh, make this work. They can throw all kinds of money at this, and it's not going to change the reality that the young people nowadays, whether you like it or not, are picking whatever the culture is that they see on TikTok or the internet, or and you're not going to change that unless you're prepared to prevent American TV to get into Quebec.
Censorship. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean,
the whole world now is changed so that it's a world culture based on Hollywood, because that's the predominant media source for ideology and aspects of social interaction. So in essence, you're finding that all the countries in the world are looking very similar in their downtown city cores and their entertainment, their social interactions, their businesses, their services they're providing. They're all the same no matter where you go in the world. There's very few places that aren't. Most of them are rural, where they don't have the internet and the propaganda bombasting them daily. They have a little bit of cultural differentiation, but the rest of the world, no, sorry, don't see it. And
well,
I'm an isolated redneck in Alberta, for crying out loud.
the action plan states that according to the latest data from Canada Census of Population, the number of francophones outside of Quebec is 3.5% in 2021. 3.5%. So they're going to take $4.5 billion and dump it someplace. They're going to bring in these programs where you have to be a certain level of bilingualism in order to be a supervisor in the federal government, and somehow they're going to change that number.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Good luck. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but hey, don't support true cultural components of our Canadian culture, like Canadian culture dance. I mean, I've researched it all across Canada. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars researching it to protect identity of all Canadians, but spend $4 billion on a few percentile of a language issue. I don't have any faith in politicians anymore. Never did, but hey, that's besides the point. The last guy I really liked was Honest Joe Clark. So if you want to know my feelings, Honest Joe Clark got screwed over by Mulroney passing bags of money around at a leadership thing, and that was the last time I cared for politics.
Corey, I've discovered the weakness in your applications. In English, they spell dance D-A-N-C-E.
Yeah.
In French, it's spelled D-A-N-S-E.
Oh, well, hey, I can change that, and now I'm in the money. They're going to give me billions of dollars because I'm a cultural component of Canada. Perfect. Thank you, Cal. I know where the money is. All in the spelling.
And put a la in front of that, like an L-A.
Yeah, la, yeah.
Now,
Canadian culture.
96 0.5% of the Canadian population will think you're talking about Los Angeles dance, but
Yeah,
but the 3.5%, the 3.5% will understand that it's French
French.
dance.
Yeah, it's a cultural component of Canada now. Now I'm entitled to a few $billion. Thank you, Cal. It's going to be fun to see how much money comes my way when I make those little changes.
Anyways, we've beaten this to death.
Yeah, I think so.
So if you're
My-
concerned about your taxpayers' dollars being flushed down the drain in various things that you never even hear about, this is definitely one of them.
Yeah. Well, on that note, check out our Patreon site, Entertainment Talent. We do market Canadian culture dance. We're going to change the spelling of it, I think, soon. Hopefully you can get some of the posts there as well as on YouTube. Check out our sister channel, Podcaster Comedy. I think we added some funny that they haven't been adding. Okay, we'll catch you later.
Good
Take
afternoon.
care.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.